The bright lights of the Good Morning America studio were already buzzing as the production team prepared for one of their most highly anticipated interviews of the week. Mark Wahlberg, Hollywood star and entrepreneur, was scheduled to appear live to promote his upcoming film and new business ventures. The audience, both in the studio and watching at home, expected nothing short of entertainment. But no one could have predicted the storm that was about to unfold. George Stephanopoulos, the seasoned journalist and co-anchor of GMA, sat poised at the center desk. Known for his calm yet piercing interview style, George was often praised for drawing out the most unexpected revelations from his guests. Yet, he was also infamous for pushing a little too hard, sometimes leaving celebrities visibly uncomfortable. When Wahlberg arrived, dressed in a tailored navy suit with a crisp white shirt, he looked every bit the Hollywood powerhouse. His usual smile was there, but those who knew him closely could sense an edge in his demeanor, a readiness to defend himself if challenged. The interview began smoothly enough. "So, Mark," George started, "this new film of yours, an action-packed thriller with a strong family undertone, what drew you to this role?" Wahlberg leaned forward, flashing his trademark grin. "I'm always looking for roles that challenge me but also speak to real people. This movie's about resilience, loyalty, and what you're willing to fight for. It's personal." The audience clapped politely, but George quickly shifted gears. "You've had a long career filled with ups and downs," he pressed, "but some critics have said your recent choices, both in films and business, seem more about money than art. How do you respond to that?" The smile on Wahlberg's face stiffened. He adjusted his cufflink before answering. "George, look, I've worked hard my whole life. From the streets of Boston to Hollywood, nothing was handed to me. If I choose projects that make financial sense, it's because I've got a family to think about, employees to support. That doesn't mean I'm not passionate about the work." The tension was subtle but growing. The control room noticed it. Camera operators leaned in. The audience shifted uneasily. George nodded slowly, but his tone sharpened. "Fair enough. But you've also faced criticism for some of your past comments, particularly about balancing faith and fame. Some people feel you use your faith when it's convenient but don't always live up to those values. What do you say to that?" Wahlberg's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being confronted this directly on morning television. "George, with all due respect," Wahlberg said, his voice a shade deeper, "my faith is between me and God. I'm not here to justify it to critics or to you. What I do is try to be better every day. I make mistakes, I own them. But questioning my sincerity, that's crossing a line." A murmur swept through the live audience. Some nodded in agreement with Wahlberg's defense, others seemed intrigued by the rising tension. But George didn't back down. "Mark, the reason I ask," he continued, "is because when public figures present themselves a certain way, people expect consistency. For instance, in one interview you condemned Hollywood excess, yet you also invested millions into a luxury fitness brand. Isn't there a contradiction?" That was the spark that lit the fire. Wahlberg leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, as if debating whether to even respond. Then he leaned forward, eyes locked on George. "You know what, George? You sit here, asking questions like you've got it all figured out. But you've never lived my life, faced my struggles, or carried my responsibilities. You read headlines and think you know the whole story. You don't. You think success means you get to judge people, but I didn't come here for a lecture." The room went silent. Even the control room, normally buzzing with chatter, froze. Stephanopoulos shifted in his seat, perhaps realizing he had gone too far, but his journalistic instincts urged him to hold ground. "I'm not judging, Mark," George replied, his tone still firm but quieter. "I'm asking questions the public wants answered." Wahlberg shook his head. "No, George. You're trying to paint me into a corner on live TV, and I'm not playing that game. I came here to talk about my work, my team, and what we've built, not to have my character torn apart by someone who doesn't know me." At this point, Wahlberg's frustration was palpable. His face was flushed, his body tense. He glanced off camera, as if looking for someone on his team. The audience could feel the electricity of the moment. This was no longer a routine interview. George, sensing he might lose control of the situation, attempted to smooth things over. "Mark, if I touched a nerve, that wasn't my intention. Let's shift gears then." But Wahlberg interrupted, his voice cutting sharp. "No, George. You don't get to just shift gears after disrespecting me on national TV. I've dealt with enough of this in my career. I don't need it here. And then, to the shock of everyone in the studio, Mark Wahlberg unclipped his microphone, set it firmly on the desk, and stood up. The audience gasped audibly. Camera operators scrambled to follow him as he pushed his chair back and began walking off the set. "Mark, wait," George called after him, half rising from his seat. But Wahlberg didn't stop. Without another word, he strode across the stage and exited through the side curtain, leaving stunned silence in his wake. The camera cut awkwardly back to George, who was visibly unsettled. He cleared his throat, adjusted his notes, and tried to recover. "Well," George said with forced composure, "that was Mark Wahlberg, everyone. We'll be right back after this break." The network cut to commercial, but the damage, and the headlines, were already written. In the control room, producers exchanged wide-eyed looks. Social media was exploding as clips of Wahlberg storming off began circulating instantly. What was supposed to be a promotional interview had turned into one of the most dramatic live television moments of the year. And it wasn't over. The commercial break felt like an eternity for the Good Morning America team. George Stephanopoulos sat at the desk, flipping through his notes with a stiff jaw, while the crew scrambled behind the cameras. Robin Roberts leaned in, whispering something to him, and Michael Strahan shook his head, half in disbelief at what had just unfolded. When the broadcast returned, George put on his signature calm expression, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "We want to apologize for the abrupt ending of our last segment. Mark Wahlberg was here to discuss his upcoming projects. Unfortunately, the conversation became heated, and he chose to leave the set. We respect his decision. It was professional. It was polished, but it couldn't erase what millions of viewers had just witnessed." Social media erupts. By the time the show ended, Twitter, or X, as it was now called, Instagram, and TikTok were on fire. Clips of Wahlberg ripping off his mic and storming out were trending under hashtags like #WahlbergWalksOff, #GMA Clash, and #George vs Mark. One user wrote, "Mark Wahlberg just made morning TV history. Stephanopoulos pushed too far." Another countered, "George was doing his job. Wahlberg couldn't handle the heat. Shows who he really is." Within hours, think pieces began popping up online. Some media outlets painted Wahlberg as the victim of a hostile interview. Others suggested his explosive reaction only proved George's point about contradictions in his public image. Wahlberg speaks out. That afternoon, Wahlberg's team released a carefully worded statement. Greater than, Mark Wahlberg values his fans and appreciates opportunities to share his work. Today's interview on Good Morning America unfortunately became less about his projects and more about personal attacks. Mark felt it was best to walk away rather than escalate the situation. He remains grateful to his supporters and looks forward to connecting with them on his own terms. The statement struck a balance, defensive yet diplomatic. Still, Wahlberg's frustration was clear. Hours later, Wahlberg posted a short video on Instagram, filmed inside his car. His Boston accent was thick, his words direct. "Look, I've done this a long time. I'll answer tough questions, no problem. But I'm not gonna sit there while someone questions my faith, my family, or my integrity. That's where I draw the line. I'll always stand up for myself." End of story. The video went viral instantly. Celebrities chimed in. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson left a supportive comment, "Proud of you, brother. Stand your ground." Meanwhile, critics accused Wahlberg of being thin-skinned. George defends himself. George Stephanopoulos, however, wasn't about to take the blow quietly. That evening on ABC News, he addressed the controversy. "As journalists, we have a responsibility to ask difficult questions, even when they make people uncomfortable," he said during a segment. Mark Wahlberg is an accomplished actor and businessman, but public figures are held to a different standard. "My intention was never to offend but to seek clarity." Behind the scenes, sources revealed that George felt blindsided by Wahlberg's walkout. He believed the questions were fair, tough, yes, but within journalistic boundaries. Still, even some of his colleagues admitted he had pushed a little too hard. Hollywood reacts. The fallout rippled through Hollywood. Publicists began whispering about whether GMA had become too hostile for celebrity promotion. Some even floated the idea that stars would avoid live interviews on the show in favor of pre-recorded, controlled appearances. Meanwhile, Wahlberg's fanbase rallied. His new movie's trailer, which had dropped the same week, surged in views. Advance ticket sales spiked. Ironically, the clash gave his project more publicity than the interview ever could have. One entertainment columnist wrote, "In walking off set, Wahlberg may have just pulled off the greatest unplanned PR move of the year. A private call. What the public didn't know, at least not right away, was that Wahlberg and George eventually spoke privately." According to insiders, ABC executives arranged a phone call between the two men the following day. The conversation, described as tense but respectful, lasted nearly half an hour. Wahlberg reiterated that he felt ambushed. George acknowledged that perhaps his line of questioning had crossed into personal territory. By the end of the call, they agreed to move forward without further hostility, though neither issued a joint statement. The larger conversation. The incident sparked a bigger cultural debate. Morning talk shows had long walked a fine line between journalism and celebrity promotion. Were hosts meant to dig deep and challenge their guests, or keep things light and promotional? Editorials filled newspapers. On CNN, a panel debated whether Wahlberg was justified. On Fox News, pundits accused liberal media elites of trying to tear down successful men of faith. On entertainment blogs, the clash was reduced to memes and gifs of Wahlberg storming out. The aftermath. Weeks later, the dust began to settle. Wahlberg returned to late-night TV, where hosts like Jimmy Fallon poked fun at the incident in a lighthearted way. Wahlberg laughed it off, but it was clear he was still cautious about interviews. As for George Stephanopoulos, his reputation took a temporary hit. Some viewers praised his professionalism, others accused him of arrogance. GMA's ratings, however, spiked in the short term, proof that controversy sells. Months down the line, both men would occasionally reference the incident, always with a tinge of humor. Wahlberg joked during a podcast, "Hey, at least I didn't throw the chair." George later quipped at a media event, "If Mark ever comes back, I'll stick to asking about his workout routine." But behind the laughs, the memory of that morning lingered, a reminder that live television can still deliver raw, unscripted drama in an age where most things feel polished and rehearsed. The legacy of the clash. In the end, the fiery clash between Mark Wahlberg and George Stephanopoulos became one of those pop culture moments that everyone remembered where they were when they saw it. For Wahlberg, it reinforced his reputation as someone unafraid to walk away when pushed too far. For George, it was a lesson in the delicate balance between tough journalism and respecting boundaries. And for viewers, it was proof that even in the polished world of morning television, real emotions can break through the script, and sometimes, walking off set speaks louder than words ever could.